Our next speaker is Sujay Kumar. Sujay founded Activism for the Animals in 2018 after realizing the need to speak up from the animals' perspectives, the need to mobilize and build a large movement against a system which has normalized violence towards non-human animals. The group has since become a nationwide movement of grassroots activists. Sujay has been a part of several non-violent disruptions in Pune. He has organized disruptions, protests, vigils, and investigations to expose the truth behind the industries of animal exploitation. His main focus is on recruiting and training new activists to take up activism and to speak up boldly for non-human animals. The title of this talk is The Importance of Non-Violent Direct Action. So Sujay, over to you.
Thank you, George, for this amazing introduction, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, team, for doing what you are doing, and thank you for organizing this amazing conference. I have attended a few of the sessions, and those were like really amazing. Thank you all for doing this. So I'll just take a minute before I start. I'll introduce briefly about what we do, and then we can start with the presentation. So AFTA, that is Activism for the Animals, is a network and not an organization, because we believe that we might need organizations, but we need ordinary people to take extraordinary actions for the animals. So with that vision, we are a network which are mobilizing a large movement against speciesism in India. We are focusing on training, recruitment, and we are helping people to form their own teams. We are also targeting the system rather than challenging individuals. And we are also trying to focus on creating a movement where everyone can come and take action for the animals, no matter how, no matter the background of the individual. Okay, so there's a slight disclaimer that even if you are disagreeing with me today, it's perfectly fine. As long as we are trying and working for animal liberation, that's all good. So feel free to disagree with me on any of it. But whatever whichever information is going to be shared today is based on actual practicality and based on historical facts. So not much of a theory, but based on the past social justice movements and the current scenario. The entire talk will be mostly about the importance of non-violent direct action. And at the very end, I'll be speaking about animal-centric activism. So I'll start. So what we learn from studying the history of issue-based movements is that time and time again, regardless of the unique qualities of the certain issues or groups being addressed, things tend to follow a familiar path. Trends emerge which appear to be inalienable. I'll talk more about it with few examples, but to me, the most exciting thing about this pattern is how long it takes to play out.
So we speak with one voice for a world where every animal is free.
J'allais dire l'esclave, j'allais dire l'esclave noir. Les gens comme vous auraient d'accord avec Neil A. Brower accused.
我们将继续为所有的动物争取自由。
בסבל כולם שווים.
Os animais não são coisas.
हम सबको हमारी जिंदगी बहुत प्यारी है.
Que todos los animales merecen ser libres.
Every year, more cities and activists speak up and stand up for the animals. And one day soon, whether it's 10 years from now or 100, every innocent animal will be safe and happy and free. And we will speak and fight until that day comes.
Thank you for playing that video. My question to everyone is, you can just use the chat option, or if you can, you can unmute yourself and speak. What is the difference between non-violence and non-violence with a hyphen? Don't use Google or anything, just give an answer. And it's okay if you're wrong, just share whatever you have in mind. Okay. I can see someone has said sounds the same. Okay, non-violence is active intervention and taking positive steps to stop the violence, while non-violence with a hyphen is absence of violence. So, yeah, so as Durga said, so non-violence without a hyphen is active intervention to stop the violence along with your non-participation. That can be summed up to activism. You know, you're actively trying to stop the violence. With non-violent means, while non-violence with the hyphen means just abstaining from violence, your non-participation. Can we go to the next slide? So what is direct action? I have an answer in 2 words, but I'll come back to that later. But first, I want to tell you a story. A friend of mine tells this story about one of his law professors, Jeff Stone, when Jeff came to the University of Chicago as a young, long-haired hippie, fresh off the civil rights movement. And one of his students came up to him and said, "I want to start a gay rights organization." What do you think Jeff's response was? His response was, "Gay rights? That sounds like a criminal conspiracy." Now, this was in a day, an age when if you were gay and came out, your parents would just lock you in an institution and throw away the key. But within a few decades, so much has changed. Gay Pride is one of the biggest celebrations in the world. And of course, thanks to the Supreme Court of India, it's no longer a crime to be gay. And in many countries, this movement has successfully achieved marriage equality. And how did this happen? Let me show you how. It was 40 years of messy, turbulent, and confrontational action such as this. The idea behind action like this was simple. We can't win if no one is talking. We need to have conversation. We need to have that dialogue. So let's cry out from every city, from every neighborhood, and every corner until the world finally starts to talk. This was what the gay rights movement called direct action. But direct action also includes so much more, like talking to your friends and family and writing letter to the editor. The key thing that tied it all together, can we go to the next slide? Challenging rather than accommodating injustice. But it's not just the gay rights movement that used this definition. Let's consider Oxford English Dictionary defines direct action as the use of strikes, demonstrations, or other public forms of protest rather than negotiation to achieve one's demand. The Martin Luther King Center defines direct action as the strategic use of non-violent tactics to bring an oppressive party into dialogue. So let me just give you a fun fact that Martin Luther King was inspired so much by Gandhi. Gandhi's principle is called Gandhian principle, and Martin Luther King's principle is called Kingian principle for non-violence. So direct action is a moral force to counter injustice. Why have historical movements used these definitions for direct action? Because they understood the root of the problem. And the root of the problem, when we are dealing with systems of oppression, it's just not an isolated case of abuse here or there that you can solve by gluing some logs or smashing some windows. The root of the problem is cultural, political, and moral. And the only way to solve a moral problem is to use a moral force. So to answer the question, what is direct action? Direct action is a moral force. Those are the two words, moral force. Direct action is moral force. Direct action is challenging rather than accommodating injustice. Before I say more, I want to introduce a new concept. Can you go to the next slide, please? Participants in every social movement tend to think of the world in a dichotomy, us and them. Activists and those they are trying to impact, those within the movement and everyone else. But there are many different levels of alignment or disalignment with any cause. Can we go to the next slide? This is called a spectrum of allies. The pie that you're seeing right now on the screen, this is called a spectrum of allies. What is spectrum of allies basically is, it's a strategic tool to examine the range of social forces and groups spread across a spectrum, from those who are the most dedicated opponents to those who are the most active supporters. This tool can uncover how tactics need to be planned in relation to whether or not they attract key allies, encourage more optimistic mobilization efforts through a dedicated realization that it is not necessary to win over everyone to our point of view, and assesses where a group needs to do more research related to allies. In most social change situations, there is a struggle between those who want to change and those who don't. On the one hand, there are people who are like active supporters of the change, not just people who believe in the change, but people who are actually taking action to make the reality. People like you and me. On the other hand, there are people who are active opposers, people who are actively taking actions to prevent the change. So in activist work, we often focus on two groups. Yet most people are somewhere between the neutrals, if you can see on the spectrum of allies. So it can be, societies, towns, provinces, etc. Include a range of groups that can be put on a spectrum from the closest to the point of your group to the farthest away. This spectrum of allies illustrates this point. So the goal of the spectrum of allies is to identify different people or specific groups of people in each category, then design actions and tactics to move them from one wedge to the left. So it's not completely black and white as we want to see vegans versus non-vegans or activists versus, XYZ, but it's like a big spectrum that we are like ignoring. So we cannot just categorize everything into two. We have to look on the various spectrums of the entire population. So the good news is, in most social change campaigns, it is not necessary to win over the opponent to your viewpoint. It is only necessary to move the central pie wedges, that are the neutrals, one step to your direction. This is important. If we shift each wedge one step, we are likely to win, even if the hardliners on the other side never move. The hardliners in our case will be the animal agriculture industry. Okay, that means our goal is not to convince the animal industry to end themselves. Instead, it is moving the rest of the society to shut them down. Often activists have the mistaken idea that they need to win everyone to their side, which invites despair, or that we need to change the animal industry or the people actively fighting against the campaign, again inviting despair. When organizers bring an optimistic attitude instead of despair to the task of mobilization, it is a lot easier to get people on board. The spectrum of allies also reminds us that there is a need for many roles. Different actions will reach folks at a different place in the spectrum. So there are many ways to support a campaign, from lobbying politicians to marching on the streets. So don't be disheartened that you cannot do a certain form of activism. You can do other forms of activism because we need people to reach at a different spectrum. So this tool also evaluates our work. So if we are moving towards our path, that is towards active allies or towards passive allies, then we are doing good. But if we are not reaching that towards that goal, we need to rethink our strategy. Okay, so if we see in the beginnings of we see the beginnings of a more nuanced understanding of how society can be partitioned in relation to any given issue. So for us, active allies can be the activists, passive allies can be the vegans, neutrals can be the people who like animals, but yet who are like not yet connected yet because the message has not reached out to them. Passive opponents can be the trolls that we engage on a regular basis, not occasional troll, regular trolls on social media. Active opponents can be your animal agriculture industry. Can we go to the next slide? Now I want to show you a number that many of us won't believe. Today, if you go on the streets asking people questions regarding animal rights, you will understand that there is not really a lack of compassion in the society. Almost everyone is against animal abuse and wouldn't hurt an animal themselves. And even with making them aware of the facts about this violence, majority of them refuse to change their food choices. So my friend Ankita said that during her childhood, it was considered extreme for women to work and be financially independent. It was expected for women to get married, do household work, and not, follow their dream of a career. In just few decades, things have changed dramatically. Now families in our hometown encourage girls to pursue higher education and become financially independent. And restraining women to do what they want and study what they want is considered backward. Can we go to the next slide? So what do you mean by saying that changing ideas versus changing behaviors? I mean to say that society has definitely changed, but in order for us to capitalize on this progress now, that all animals benefit, we must institutionalize a focus on changing ideas, not on changing behavior. Let me explain what I mean by this. Can we go to the next slide, please? So here is our spectrum of allies again. A focus on changing behaviors would look like whatever means we would do to chip away at this black line. The black lines here means the lines between neutral and the passive allies. Getting one person at a time to stop eating animal products. I used to think that it didn't matter why someone went vegan, and that if I could just get them across that line, they would eventually get on board with everything. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so this is the number, 84%. This is currently the number of vegans and vegetarians who eventually return to eating animals, according to a 2014 study published in Psychology Today. Give me a moment, I'll just share the link of the paper as well. So it's a blog and you can just check that out later now. Okay, you can refer to that link that I've shared. This is the currently number of vegans, vegetarian who eventually return to eating animals, right? So now we know why that number of vegans is so stubborn, because our mind is rushing at changing behavior was creating something shallow, because behavior is a symptom of ideas and treating a symptom ultimately proves unsustainable. In contrast to this, a focus on changing ideas would take the form of looking at this whole group, the neutral, So instead of just looking at one individual at a time, let's consider this as a whole group and trying to redefine their thinking gradually, targeting not each individual but society at large. If we can concentrate on this neutral group with no great personal investment in the status quo and redefine them over 40 years to not only condemn the torture of dogs and cats, but to love them enough to generate a new multi-billion industry around pampering them, then we can make them support species equality. Indeed, this is what the movements of the past teach us. Victory is not predicted by gradual rise over 40 years in the number of dedicated supporters of a cause, but a more subtle elevation of the cause in the minds of the relatively neutral majority. So now that we have an idea of a different goal, how does this inform our tactics? Well, I want you all to meet Emmeline. Can we go to the next slide? So this is Emmeline Pankhurst, the activist who gave half the world the right to vote and was named one of the Times Magazine's 100 most important people of the 20th century. But she wasn't successful from the start. Let me explain. Of education and lobbying, 10 years of working within the system, Emmeline managed to get a single member of the parliament to present a bill for women's rights, just a single member. And that took over 10 years. The guy gets up on the podium and presents the bill, and Emmeline and her friends are shaking with anticipation as they wait for the responses. And the responses was, who can guess? Can anyone guess what was the response? When that single individual stood up to the podium and presented the bill for women's rights. Can anyone guess? Yeah. So everyone, the responses were full of laughter, and one by one, the members of parliament got in front of the entire legislature and told offensive jokes about women. They literally laughed Emmeline out of the building. That night, Emmeline and her daughters wiped away their tears and decided that they had enough. They decided to take direct action. They put together a plan to disrupt a gathering of one of the largest political parties in Britain. A few women would sneak into the crowd with banners hidden under their dresses. At a key moment, they would unveil the banner, jump on their chairs, and shout that women deserved the right to vote. Emmeline's daughter, Christabel, decided she would intentionally spit on any officer who came to drag her out. And they did this knowing that spitting on an officer was an offense that required arrest. There were fierce debates about this within the group. Some said it was confrontational, rude, or even ridiculous. Some said that, it will make us look like, people who have no ambition, no agenda, just want to create nuisance for others. But Emmeline told everyone, being nice has gotten us nowhere. It's time to take a stand. And that's exactly what they did. They pulled the plan off without a hitch. The women were dragged out of the meeting, and Emmeline's daughter spit on an officer. And she was placed in a jail. But even though they were condemned in many ways, a funny thing happened. No one could stop talking about women's rights. No one could stop talking about that. And because people began to talk and they began to realize that the deep inconsistency in the way society viewed women, we trusted women with the lives of our children, but we couldn't trust them to vote. More and more actors started taking disruptive action, and before long, they had a huge movement. 10 years later, they won. But even more importantly, they had inspired a cascade that crossed the globe as dozens of nations followed the Pankhurst on the path of liberation. And it all started with a volley of spit that shook the world. And this is a key reason why direct action is vital, because it works. Political scientists talk about 3 different types of action. contained activism working within the system, such as lobbying or education. The problem is that no one pays any attention, right? Uh, you might reach out to individuals, a few individuals, but it doesn't get much attention. Violence, while it gets plenty of attention, you lose the moral high ground. But non-violent direct action is the sweet spot and has been described by political scientists as the strongest weapon of social movements. It generates attention, it broadens the circle of debate, and it inspires action. In fact, political scientist Erica Chenoweth has what she calls the rule of 3.5%. Chenoweth has studied hundreds of movements throughout the history, and what she has found out is that when it comes to direct action, you don't need a majority. Let me repeat. When it comes to direct action, you don't need a majority. You don't even need a large minority. All you need is 3.5% of engaging in sustained non-violent direct action, and you win every single time. And this is based on studies. It is not just a theory. So this offers another notion on the spectrum of allies, which upsets our old dichotomy of us versus them. So you might have seen on social media many activists creating content like, vegan versus meat eater, vegan versus XYZ. So it just, questions our dichotomy of us versus them. What if just as important a group on this spectrum as the neutral? What if just as important a group on this spectrum as the neutral majority is the second best passive allies? And what would activism hoping to influence vegans look like? Well, it would be demonstrations which inspire people to get involved themselves, actions which are able to raise awareness about an active movement and show them that there is a place for them in it. In short, ordinary people doing extraordinary things motivates and inspires other ordinary people to do the same. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things motivates and inspires other ordinary people to do the same. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, we need look no further than the 2016 primary cycle to know that anger and righteous indignation are more infectious and more motivating than other emotions. But just to make sure, several studies show that while happiness has some contagious effects, righteous indignation is not only more contagious, but more of a motivator for responsiveness behavior. It is worth adding that anger is not necessarily a bad emotion. Many of us would agree that anger is an appropriate, if not most appropriate, response to the conditions of animals in our society. And anger may be the emotion we can share with the people that makes them most sympathetic. But this is only true if we focus our anger on the system rather than individuals, right? Focusing our anger on the system, not on individuals. That is a key quality of non-violence. So we target the system and not individuals. Can we go to the next slide? Now let's look at some of the examples from the past. In 1960, 4 students sat down at a white lunch counter in North Carolina. At that time, it was illegal for Black people to even sit in these places. By the end of the campaign, over 100,000 people all across America would participate in sit-ins despite the risk of arrest, beatings, or even assassinations. They're risking their lives to speak up for their rights, to take action for their rights. Civil rights was on the front page of every newspaper in the country, and people of all colors who had previously accepted a racial tyranny as the way things are and always will be were forced to question their ideas. So people who were like resisting to actually accept that this is possible, we're now talking about it. Can we go to the next slide? Now let's look at an example from India. The Salt March in the 1930s was one of the most significant actions in the Indian independence movement. At that time, it was illegal for Indians to make money out of their own country's soil. Can you imagine? You cannot even make money off your own country's soil. Gandhi led this march, and soon thousands of people practice the tactic of civil disobedience by picking up the salt. Before the march happened, many laughed that how is picking up some salt going to shake the British Empire. Similarly, many people now will question that how are protests and disruptions going to do anything for the animal. But it worked as this march inspired thousands of people, especially from the lower economic class, to join the movement and fight for their rights by doing non-violent civil resistance. So Occupy Wall Street was a progressive protest movement that began on September 17th, 2011 in New York's City's Wall Street Financial District, receiving a global attention about economic inequality worldwide. And these activists literally just sat there and refused to leave until they got their demands. After a few weeks, they decided to protest on the Brooklyn Bridge, which obviously blocked the traffic. Made a lot of people angry, but also resulted in many arrests. But it just made the whole country to pay attention to the problem of income inequality. Coming back to India, the Indian anti-corruption movement that was in 2011 was a series of demonstrations and protests in India intended to establish strong legislation and enforcement against political corruption. The movement was named among the top 10 news stories of 2011 by Time magazine. The movement gained momentum from April 5th, 2011, when anti-corruption activist Anna Hazare, who you can see in the picture, began a hunger strike at the Jantar Mantar in New Delhi. The aim of the movement was to reduce corruption in Indian government through introduction of the Jan Lokpal Bill. The movement was a form of non-violent civil resistance featuring demonstrations, marches, acts of civil disobedience, hunger strikes, and rallies, as well as the use of social media to organize, communicate, and raise awareness. So we have this new privilege of using social media to exchange ideas and to inspire more people to take action, which the past social justice movement did not have. We have like a better way of reaching out to people. I personally remember when this protest was going on, I was scared that this old man would pass away during this hunger strike. I remember that he lost 6-7 kgs just by doing hunger strike, and since he's an old man, he thought that he's going to just die during this strike. This sacrifice of him and the mobilization of few 100,000 people, of public, the severity of this showed the public that the severity of this problem and forced the government to act on it. Can we go to the next slide? On 9th February 2016, students of Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU, held a protest on their campus against the capital punishment. A few students were arrested by the Delhi police. Soon the whole country started talking about the freedom of speech and other issues with the government. The students used the tactics of non-violence like hunger strikes, marches, rallies, etc. Next slide, please. Students of the Film and Television Institute of India, which is also known as FTII, decided to go on an indefinite strike on June 12, protesting the Information and Broadcast Ministry's surprise appointment of television actor turned politician Gajendra Chauhan as chairman of the institute. The students made the use of creative disruptions, hunger strikes, and protests to fight for their demands and were successful in getting a nationwide attention from the media. Can we go to the next slide? Now, where was I leading all this to? So in California, if there is a dog in a hot car, if you lock a dog inside a car and he, she, they, are suffering because of that, you can actually break the car, break the window, and you can just rescue the animal, and you won't be charged for it. No criminal offense will be charged against you if you're doing that for rescuing that animal. Similarly, if you have an animal inside your home, and if you find an animal inside someone's home, and because of fire that animal is going to die or is going to suffer, you are allowed to actually go there and rescue the animal, and you won't be charged with trespassing. So similarly, these activists on the image that you can see, they did an investigation in a factory farm. They saw that animals were in distress. They were dehydrated. They were cannibalizing, that is, eating each other's flesh, and they were just living in a really horrible condition. So they went there, hundreds of activists were there. They said basically that it's their right to enter these factory farms because they investigated and they showed the authorities and also the public that this is what is happening and we need to go there and rescue them. So hundreds of activists wore their biosecurity gear and walked right in these factory farms in broad daylight to rescue animals. 37 lives were saved, and 40 activists refused to leave until every single animal was free from that factory farm, and hence arrested for their act of civil disobedience. This action was also a part of campaign against Amazon and Whole Foods, which sell the eggs from this farm. Uh, Also, it is a strong statement to the industry that we are growing and we are ready to do whatever it takes to achieve animal liberation. So can we go to the next slide? So here's a beautiful picture from India this year. So these are the people who are protesting against the CAA and NRC Act in 2020, Citizen Amendment Act. So although police were like violent against them, these people were protesting with roses and they were showing compassion and love towards these individuals. They were brutalized, they were suffering from police violence and brutality. And even then they showed love and compassion for these individuals. And it just sparked news across all over India and across the world. And the sad part is because of the corona case and the COVID situation, they had to slow it down, and now nothing much is happening, but let's see if they can go any further after it. So can we go to the next slide, please? So here's my friend Shweta. So sorry if it is like triggering for you. You can just I can just skip it. But here is she protesting outside McDonald's, showing that the violence against animals, non-human animals, has been normalized, and the negative peace that has been established by this establishments is not okay. So what is negative peace actually? Negative peace is so negative peace is something which appears to be peaceful, but there is violence underneath. So if you go to KFC, McDonald's, there are dead bodies of animals everywhere, but everyone is like enjoying and having fun, and everyone is having good time. And these establishments have normalized violence against these animals that it appears to be okay. And this negative peace can be traced back to even today to other movements and past social justice movement. For example, it was okay for a man in India to own a woman as a slave, and that was considered okay. And if a husband dies, the woman was asked to go in the fire pit along with him, although the woman was completely okay, but it was considered normal and necessary. When violence is considered as normal and necessary, we have negative peace. Negative peace just means absence of peace, but the things may appear peaceful because of normalization. So I think that is it from my side about the importance of nonviolent direct action. Now I'll go back to the second part of my training. That is animal-centric activism. Can we go to the next slide? So although this training is more than 1 hour, I'll try to sum it up in few points. The second part of the training, it comes under our effective communication training. Can we go to the next slide, please? So for any social justice movement, the narrative or the framing that we make needs to be from the victim's viewpoint. So if it is like for Black Lives Matter, the viewpoint should be from their perspective, right? And for any other movement, their perspective matters. So their issues should be put on forefront. So similarly, if we are talking about animal rights, the issue should be from the victim's perspective. That so for us in AFTA, what we do is we frame our messages from the viewpoint of the victim, that is the non-human animal. So when we do that, our message is like really clear, and it puts a clear objective in our mind that we want to achieve with this message. Next comes as the us versus them. I have addressed this in the earlier slides, but our dichotomy of our mindset that we are like against non-vegans or we are against animal eaters and things like that. It doesn't work. If you are born vegan, if you were born in a vegan family, and that means like you're like super lucky. But for most of us, we were not born vegan, and we have to realize that everyone is like a victim of the societal conditioning, and it is the system. Even after going vegan, we are exploiting so many animals through our lifestyle. You know, we are exploiting animals in wildlife through agriculture process. So we are like still exploiting animals, but we have to understand why we are exploiting animals is because of the system that has been created. So we have to change the system to reduce the animal suffering as much as we can. So the next point is Socratic method. So Socratic method is like a really important method that needs to be used if you want to have like really good communication with individuals. So I'll put a question now and a statement, and the participants can just tell me which is better for them. Instead of saying that, okay, George.
Yes.
Animal abuse is wrong. This is wrong. So one is a statement that I have put my own conclusion on George, and the other one is a question. So when I'm asking you a question, the other person will communicate. But if I'm just putting a statement, it just becomes an argument, right? So when we want to have a conversation with individuals, we need to have questions in our mind. So for us, when we do activism, our objective is to recruit them for activism. So for us, the end goal is to make them activists. So our whole direction of our conversation goes towards activism. So when I'm asking certain questions will follow up towards activism. So if I'm asking, so if I'm saying, do you think animal abuse is wrong with George, the answer can be yes or no, right? It's either negative, positive, true, false, yes, no. So this is what is called as closed-ended question, right? What do you think about animal abuse, George?
I think it's completely wrong, and I don't want anything to do with it.
Okay, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it. So what is happening here is what I asked is an open-ended question. So Socratic method, it has two types of question that you can ask. A close-ended, which involves yes or no, true, false, negative, positive, an open-ended question, which invites others to think and have a more descriptive answer. Like, what do you think? How do you feel? What's your opinion about this? So remember, if you have attended school or college, if your professor is just speaking, and if they are not asking questions, you are most likely to not pay attention. But if suddenly, if I'm asking Ellie and she's like, I'm catching her off guard, she will try to pay attention more, right? So similarly, if we want to have meaningful conversation, we need to start asking questions from people instead of saying, making statements of our own. Even if we are saying that, even if we know that this is the statement, we need to have change it into a conversation. So how do we do that? By asking questions. We might remember every single facts about animals and about animal issues and everything else, but remember that humans are driven by emotion more than the facts, right? So we need to have conversations, right? So next comes as individual stories versus comprehensive facts. Now comprehensive facts are like really important when we need to have like a really strong backing, but for most of us, individual stories inspire more. So if you consider the previous examples where I discussed about Anna Hazare or any other individual, Emmeline or Gandhi or Martin Luther King or anyone else, their individual stories have inspired so many people to take action. Similarly, I would like to give an example of a rescue that we did in Pune. The chicken that we rescued from a slaughterhouse, we named him Anita. And after the rescue, the videos of Anita went viral. Everyone was talking about it. And many people started visiting my place to meet Anita. Before that, no other vegan came to my place. And after the rescue, everyone was becoming my best friend. So individual stories, I always say this, the best advocate for the animals are the animals themselves. When you come closer to them, once you interact with them, the best advocate for them are the animals themselves. Uh, right. So, but it's a good idea to have like comprehensive facts once in a while to just have a backing. But individual stories can spark a conversation and inspire so many people to actually change. For example, individual stories of Greta, who is a famous climate activist, her single individual protest outside the parliament inspired so many people to take action, and her individual story inspired so many people to actually question the government. So, like, and imagine if there were like 10 or 20 people just sitting there, they might not have, Yeah, so individual stories are like really important for our movement. So whenever we are trying to frame a sentence, frame a message for the animals, it's better to have like individual stories of those animals addressed rather than, So for example, what I'm saying is, let's say that by 2024, the population of farmed animals, land farm animals, will be 130 to 140 billion. Can you imagine what is 130 or 140 billion in your head? How does it look? Can anyone just unmute or use the chat option and say, how does it look 140 billion? Can you even imagine 140 billion? If you can imagine 140 billion, just type in, yeah. But what if I said, what if I told you a story of an animal, individual story? Would you remember that, or would you remember how does the 140 billion looks? Okay, so I'll just come back to the other points that is positive affirmation. Now, George, let's do a role play that if I'm your professor and I'm just coming to you and saying that, George, you're a horrible person, you're a bad student, and you don't deserve to get good grades this time. How would you feel?
Well, it might be true, but I would still feel bad.
Yeah, and would you be open to a conversation with me after I just insulted you?
Well, I think I would be put on the defensive and less open to a conversation.
Yes, but what if I said, I appreciate your efforts, you're trying, and you are a really good student. I see that you have, progress, and I know that you can do so much more, and you're like really good human being. So what would be your reaction in this case?
Well, I think I would appreciate that this person cares how I feel, and I think I would be more willing to listen to what you are saying to me. and take action to improve.
Yes. So we have to understand that most of us are like, we are like emotional beings. And when we have conversations with people, most people think that they are good people at heart, even for us and for non-vegans. Like they think that they are good people at heart, unless they have like mental health issues, in which case, they might not feel that they're good people at all. But for most of us, we believe that we are good people at heart. So when we say these words like you are a compassionate person, you are a kind person, and we need more people like you, and I appreciate our work. So whenever we are saying these things, we are affirming certain values which they already have. We are not saying this just to lie to them. We are saying this to actually reaffirm certain values that they already have. So when we do this, the other person is like much more open to have a conversation with me, like a true conversation, not just being scared of me. And also it shows like the other person is not there to just judge you or put you down, but have a really good conversation. The other point that I want to discuss is remembering. So for positive affirmation, what you can do is, suppose if I'm asking George, do you think animal abuse is wrong? He's saying no. He's saying yes. He's saying yes, that animal abuse is wrong. So I can just affirm that, I know that you're a kind and compassionate person, and you would never hurt an animal yourself. So what I'm doing is I'm reaffirming certain values that he already has. So it just puts me on an edge in my conversation. So we have to understand that whenever we are having a conversation, we need to have a specific end goal. So for me, my end goal would be to convince George to get active, right? So my entire communication pattern will revolve around that, right? But it's not a script, right? It's not a script. It's really dynamic and it's really subjective. So experiment and try it out, and also don't be ever afraid to make mistakes. Because that's the most important part of learning. So next point is remembering your own speciesism. Now, this I have addressed in a brief in the other points, but what happens is once we start becoming vegan or activists, we tend to sometimes judge others, saying that you are a horrible person, you're bad, you're a bad person, you're exploiting animals, which might be true, which can be true, right? But we have to understand they too are victims of the system that has been created. So we cannot just get people to our side by putting them down, right? If you go on social media, you will find actors creating content, like vegan versus meat eaters, vegan versus hunters, and things like that. Do you think that person will go home and look at the video saying that, thinking that this person has, actually made fun of me on social media, which millions of people have watched? Do you think that person will be encouraged enough to change, or do you think that person is most likely to become an anti-vegan or anti-animal rights? We like to watch drama, but it does not affect that person, much, to be honest. It might actually help people to understand the various arguments that we have, but I'll address one crucial point at the very end, why we get arguments in the first place. But before that, I have like two other points that I want to address, as challenging system versus changing individuals. So what we do at Activism for the Animals is we inspire people to take action, and we put the focus on challenging systems. So how we can do is we can just put our efforts and our work into actually building a movement which actually can build strategies and pressure campaigns and other forms of activism focusing on changing the system rather than changing individuals. And the last point is support. And this support is just not basically for others as well, but also for you. as animal rights activists or liberation activists or welfareist activists, at certain times we might face burnout, or we might feel demotivated. It was just 2 days ago I was feeling like really demotivated because I did not create any content on social media from past few weeks, and I was not able to manage time. You might have personal obligation, professional obligations, and it's okay to take a break for yourself, and also to show support to others is like really important. I strongly believe that it's much more important to have a strong community than doing regular weekly outreach on the street. Only when you have a really strong community, you will be able to actually put a really strong effort for animal liberation. So I think for me, most important is to build a strong community, and then 40% I would say is to actually focusing on system change. Otherwise, what will happen is people will leave you on a regular basis, and you will be stuck behind thinking that I'm not going anywhere. And I have seen so many people who have quit activism because they did not have a good community, right? We can do activism all alone, but it's like really scary. But when we come together, we can actually change the world. So now at the very end, I would just like to just talk about the reason why we get arguments like plants have feelings, circle of life, canine teeth though, God made animals for us, humans are meat eaters, etc., etc. So if you have heard these animals before many times, you can just type yes on the chat. Okay, so I see a lot of yes in the chat. So why do we get arguments? There are going to be like various individuals who are going to share you ebooks or video lessons on how to tackle these arguments. But we have to understand that why we get arguments in the first place and how you can actually avoid arguments. I have been doing activism from the past 8+ years now, and I have been involved in many argumentative conversations which led to nowhere. Only I felt angry and disappointed with myself. And it's like really frustrating. Sometimes even I thought that I would quit activism and I should just focus on eating and sleeping. So why do we get arguments is just because of our framing. For any social justice movement, the framing needs to change if it is not working. For example, the anti pro-abortion movement became the pro-choice movement. Anti-abortion movement became the pro-life movement. So for them, the entire framing changed to better reflect their thinking. And for us, if the word vegan is becoming problematic because we are getting arguments, we need to change the narrative. So for us, what we can do is we can explain the entire thing, but in a different way. So instead of saying about veganism, we can talk about speciesism, right? It is because of speciesism, animal abuse is happening. And speciesism is just not limited to farm animals. It is just, it also includes wildlife. Wildlife or free roaming. Wildlife is a speciesist language, a speciesist term. So instead of wildlife, we can use free roaming. Right. So I would really suggest everyone to follow this YouTube account on named Challenge Speciesism. George, can you just type it out for me? Challenge Speciesism on YouTube. You can watch the entire video series. They have like 18 videos which will help you to change your own narrative for the animals. And the best part about it is you can actually test it out, unlike theories, right? So whatever you are learning today or tomorrow or yesterday, what you have learned yesterday, just practice it out and implement it rather than just listening to it. The best part about this, what I've told is you can actually start doing that out after this presentation gets over. Right. So if we are not, so why I'm saying that we need to change the narrative is because I've actually experienced this and I've found success in after changing the narrative, I have recruited more than 300, 400 people in span of just like 1 month for activism after changing my tactics. So to conclude, I would just say that don't be like really disappointed. Don't be sad. If you can do something, do it. If you cannot do it, just support others. Also show support to everyone and take action for the animals. We are in this together. If you disagree with someone, politely provide constructive criticism instead of blaming or shaming them on social media. So here, thanking everyone for patiently listening to me. Yeah, this one.
We've got your
So
contact
these are
details.
our social media accounts. You can just check them out. You can actually also check our trainings that we have done so far. I'm open to questions.
Great, thank you so much. So we've got about 10 minutes for questions. If anybody has any questions, please do put them into the chat and we'll try to get through them. We've received a few already. So we have a question from Manya, which is quite a practical question. And the question is, how do you find and record inside slaughterhouses without being rejected or stopped and refused?
So here in India, still things in your country or your place might be different, but what I can share is my practical experience. So for dairy, it's like really easy. If you go there, you can just talk. They will actually allow you to record it because for them, it's like completely normal. They don't consider it as violence. But for slaughterhouses, if you go there, first of all, they're like two dynamics or two factors. First of all is that in India, most of them are not following the law, legal practices for operating a slaughterhouse. So first of all, they're like really scared if someone documents us and puts it on social media, they can get in trouble. And the second thing is they don't want their faces to be shown, and they think that they already obviously understand that this is violence and this is wrong. So in one of our cases in Pune, we went and we recorded the entire slaughterhouse, and we uploaded it on social media. And in like next week, we got a news in the newspaper that the slaughterhouse is going to be closed because of poor hygiene standard being followed. And someone actually complained after watching our video, and it was not us who posted it out to the municipal local authorities, but it was someone else, just the general public. They were disgusted by what they saw, so they asked them to shut it up. So to answer you, the best way, the safest way is to just get their permission, make them assured that we won't record your face to protect them for any verbal or physical threat that they can get on social media or on the place at which they are living. So you can make sure that they feel safe, that you're not going to harm them. And we have to understand that we are going there for the animals and not going there to fight with the people. So I hope that I have answered you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's very interesting advice. We have another question from Mika from Australia. And the question is direct action important to any country? Now, that might depend on which country you have experience with, and maybe it's up to each activist to make the decision where they are. So to build on it, India is a very big and diverse country. Have you had experiences within different regions where different groups, cultures affect how effective direct action is?
So let's be clear that direct action just doesn't mean you're going out and screaming out in the public. Direct action also means, I have said that in the earlier slide, direct action also means talking to your friends or family, writing a blog for the editor, things like that. So if you're talking just about, going out on the streets and doing such form of dramatic actions, cultural wise and region wise, you might face different scenarios. Definitely in India, it's not like that if you do certain form of activism here in one part of the country, you will get the exact same result in the other. Cultural dynamics is like really big. It's like a whole new world if you ever visit India. It's a world of its own. So
thank you. So we have another question from Monica from Japan, who says, for many people, breaking into animal agricultural facilities is considered an act of violence, even terrorism. But how can this perspective be changed, and should these acts, these tactics, be used as a way of activism?
Okay, so I think it's like a really good question and perfectly reasonable, because I also used to feel the same at one point of time, that these guys are like making the vegans look bad. Like I would never go and do that. And a year later, I was going out and doing a disruption inside KFC. So for many people, breaking into animal facilities is considered as an act of violence or terrorism. So how can we change that? The simple best answer is to just by doing it. You can obviously have educational events or trainings to make people understand, but the best way is to just show them that why it is important. And if you want, you can just read about it, and it's not like just a theory. People have done it. Other social justice movement have done it and got the results. Why should we be lagging behind and be afraid? Would we be scared if our own family members and friends were in these facilities and were suffering? No, right? So why does it change when it comes to non-human animals? I think we should do it, but it involves high risk. So we need to do our homework. We cannot just go out and start breaking into these facilities and these places and doing things like that. We need to be really organized, and that is where skill learning comes in. So we need to do our homework. And yes, this should be used as a way of activism. Many activists have done it. So the picture that I showed about the factory farm where 37 ducks, 37 chickens were saved. So I remember there was this, I don't remember the exact name of the web series, but they actually made an episode on the entire scene. So they had the blue t-shirts, and they showed how the activists actually changed themselves inside the facility so that the operations stopped. So this incident actually was made into an episode, right? And people actually got to know more about it. So I think it really works, and the best way is to just do it rather than just it's a high risk thing, but animal liberation is not easy, so we need to take that risk.
But for now, thank you very much, Sujay, for all your insights, and thank you everybody for taking part and for all your questions.